Let me welcome everybody. Let's take our seats and start our conversation with our eminent guest. My name is Dimitris Keridis. Obviously, I'm not Nefeli Lygerou, as mentioned in the program. There was a slight change there. I am a professor of international relations at Pantheon University in Athens, and I will stay at that. So I'm introducing myself, and we have a very great guest here with us, who has just arrived from Beijing in China, Dr. Wang, who is going to talk to us about the Chinese role in global governance. Obviously, if there is an elephant in the room of international relations these days, there is none other than China and the rise of China. And what does this mean for the world, for world stability, and for global governance? So I would suggest I give Dr. Wang the floor for an initial comment, and then we can take some questions from the audience, and I have a few to have a great dialogue. Obviously, the time is very limited, and we have to be very punctual. So, Dr. Wang, welcome to the center of the ancient Greek world here in Delphi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting me, having me here. I'm just come here last midnight, so very serious hijack. But no problem. I wake up very early and walk along of the town. It's very beautiful, and I admire the temple, and then come here and talking about China and the global governance. My name is Wang, a professor and executive dean of Chongyang Institute, Renmin University of China, which is one of the top universities in China. And in the past few years, we, as a think tank scholar, we are trying our best to learn about global governance, because global governance is a very new term in China, and especially just recent years, we certainly found that there is a word, there's a term about the global governance. So the forum asked me talking about the China's roles in the global governance. I think I just want to share firstly about 3 points, 3 roles of China in the global governance. First is that just I mentioned learner or student. Because in the past 40 years, since the Deng Xiaoping period, about the reform and the opening up policy, China always learned from the world, to be honestly. In the 1978, China learned from the West how to reform, how to touch the world. And since 1992, if you know, Deng Xiaoping went to the South China and delivered a lot of speech. We called it the South China speech. And then China speed up, China pushed modernization reform. And then into how to modernization, how to be the marketization. We learn a lot from the West. And then in 2001, China entered WTO. And you know, there are times all the China media is talking about the wolf, you know, the wolf was coming. And then those strong Western international company destroy so many China's national industrial company and the national industrial brand. And then China's manufacturing company, they work very hard and then grew up and compete with international companies. So since 2001, after we entered WTO, we learned the international rules, especially international business rules, international commerce rules from the West. And then in 2016, when China hosted the G20, I'm a top G20 scholar in China, and I'm the co-chair of the T20 China in 2016. And at that time, you know, before the 2016, few people in China knew what is G20. So I think that we still learn how to host a so big so big summit. So I think that always we learn, we learning by doing, and more learning, more growth, more stronger, much stronger. This is one of the China's laws, and also one China's experience in the past 40 years. Second point, second laws of China is that the contributor. I think that in the many years, in the latest many years, the world, especially the Western public opinion, underestimate the contribution of China in the global governance, especially the economic contributions. In the past 10 years, China's contribute average per year the 30% economic growth of the globe because of China's very fast economic growth. Not only that, but for example, China contribute a lot of China's own very special solution. For example, China get rid of 70% poor people of the world. Also, infrastructure. We all know infrastructure in China are very good, and also e-commerce. And in the recent 5 years, China's smartphone, China's we call it shared economy, is very good. We contribute China experience. For example, nowadays in China, over 90% younger generations in their daily life, they don't need cash. They just use a smartphone. One smartphone can solve every problem, anything in his daily life. So I'm promise, China would be the first countries without cash, without no cash countries. It's true. For example, my son, my daughter, in his daily life, they just use one phone, enough. I give them the cash. They, no, Daddy, don't give me the cash. Don't give me money. Just transfer the money from the smartphone, and they scared everything they can scare and pay. So this digital payment in China is very good. There's a contribute. Final, it's an innovator. What is innovator? What is innovation? I'm not only pointing at technological innovation. Not only that, it's very easy to be understood. I'm just talking about political innovation. So this year is a very interesting year. This year for China is a 70th anniversary of the new China, CPC China, and also 1 year. Maybe you didn't mention. This year is still the 30th anniversary of the end of a history theory. 30 years ago, Professor Fukuyama, he's my friend too, Professor Francis Fukuyama, he published an article talking about the end of history. And that time, he talked, because the end of the Cold War and the Soviet Union collapsed. And then all the world trust democracy finally win, and the history will end into the so-called democratic institution, a political institution. But now, 30 years later, past, nowadays, democracy, so-called democracy, became a very controversial concept. For example, Trump. Even in America, so many people rethink about the so-called democratic institute. In domestically American, no one can balance Trump's decision. Is it true democracy? No, I think democracy should more innovation, should make progress. So I think China learned from the democracy, but we didn't trust 100% democracy. We do our own path. We didn't depend on the so-called vote as American did or as West did. China do our own political institutional innovation or institutional reform. So I think that maybe, but I didn't say that China now succeed in the political innovation. No, I never mentioned about. I just talking about China want to innovate in the political institution, except the Western way, do our own path. So this is, I think, in nowadays, the new global governance period, I think this is China's rules. I just talking about that. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So, if we have questions to start, yes.
Okay, I'll start by being challenging and provocative.
If you can identify
Plutarchos Akelaris,
yes.
Professor of Economics and Finance. So one of the key things that I would say are different in your society than in our Western liberal and democratic society is the freedom of speech. And what we economists would say is that what you're doing right now, in some respects, is that you're giving up some of these issues that have to do with Western liberal democracy in order to improve your standards of living really fast, and you're doing that. And probably in 10, 20 years, you will have achieved the standards of living of the West. I have absolutely no doubt of that. Would that be a time when the Chinese people, having arrived at the standards of economic living that probably they aspire, would actually require or request to have some of these Western liberal values like the freedom of speech? What do you think?
Let me take other questions.
Good morning, Eli Tsiligianni. Thank you for being here. I would like you to comment a little bit on the social crediting system that we have heard so much about in the past few months, and that's happening in China. It seems something very strange to us, to say the least. Thank you.
The big brother, I guess, problem of this social crediting system, as a critic might
So you mentioned the massive investment in infrastructure, and I know it's very impressive. I'm wondering, though, you're building a population of people, young people, with expectations of that high level of infrastructural. So is the state prepared to maintain and advance that infrastructure? To build it is one thing, to keep it at a high standard and not disappoint the population in some way that could be an issue is quite another, I think. So I'm just wondering whether you have made those kinds of plans that will support that infrastructural investment.
Wonderful. And now we finish with one question from me, if you want. You happen to be in a country that does not have an anti-Chinese lobby. And the reason is that in this country there was no industry to be harmed by the Chinese imports. But 2001 is a year of sorrow for many in the West. And one can detect back 2001, your entry into the WTO, as the beginning of the populist counter-reaction in Western societies, in Europe and in America, especially in the industrialized zones of those places, against globalization and obviously against China. There is a lot of talk today about the trade war, and I wonder how close we are to that, if China is ready to make the necessary adjustments to the reaction emanating from the West, and where are we heading here? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so sorry. One thing is jet lag. One thing maybe I'm very traditional and very local Chinese scholars. I never go overseas, so maybe my English is not good enough to express totally. But I try my best to express. Firstly, talking about value, democratic, liberal value. Of course, all the Chinese people, they like it, admire it, and pro the democratic value. But the problem is that how to achieve the value, we have to depend on the political institutional designing or framework. But the problem is that we learn, in terms of our learning, we found that if China copied if China copy the Western model of the political institution, it will be a disaster. So China, as a huge population country, we have to do our best to achieve the common value. The common value is you're talking about freedom, rule of law. Of course, we admire it, but we use our path. For example, we didn't depend on the vote, a so-called Western vote, Western style vote, one people, one vote. I think these systems, we rethink about it. We think these systems has their own problems. So we need the innovation. We need the innovation. This is our answer, my answer. Second point is the strange economic system. Yes, China is huge. So how to manage the huge social and economic system is very hard. So I'm a think tank scholar. Every year, I were invited by our government hundreds of times to consulting for them to how to manage it. I think we have no idea how to manage such a complicated, comprehensive economic systems. We have no any till now. I mean, in the past 40 years, we learned a lot from the Western society. But now, as the second largest economy, we suddenly found that for the economic model, we have no any copy to learn. So that means we just step by step, learning by doing, step by step. For example, I think maybe you mentioned about that in the recent years, China's economic slowdown. But don't forget, our economic growth become a slowdown, but our economy become a high quality. For example, six years ago, at the beginning of the President Xi's administration, President Xi Jinping faced such a huge difficulty, including 3 points. One difficulty is the corruption, huge corruption, 6 years ago. Second point is pollution. You may remember that in Beijing, in Shanghai, there's smog, right? 6 years ago, 5 years ago. And then the poverty, huge poverty, nearly still exist 100 million poor people 6 years ago. But now, 6 years passed, China launched the anti-corruption campaign and solved almostly the corruption issues. Now in China's, few officials dare to corrupt. I'm sure in Shanghai, in Beijing, I think that's a much better, and most of the Chinese citizens support President Xi because he dare, struggle for those bad guys, big bad guys, including, for example, you know the name. I don't want to mention them. Second is pollution, anti-pollution. Nowadays, if you travel in Beijing, in Shanghai, only 6 years passed, the smog solved. We solved Beijing's smog, Shanghai smog. Not totally 100%, but much better than 6 years ago. And then anti-poverty. And nowadays, China only left 10 million poor peoples. But 6 years ago, 6 years ago, 100 million. So finally, about the trade war, I believe that. But no, we are not guaranteed. We shouldn't be guaranteed. We should still keep learning, learning by doing. So about the trade war, of course, China will adjust. But how to adjust depend the analyst of our national interest. Analysts depend on the engagement between China and the world, especially the Western countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we are going to revisit the topic of China in forums here in Delphi and elsewhere to come, and we hope to have you back to Greece soon.